Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. Just before I pass over to Jason, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. So this session will be recorded and we will be sharing the video and resources probably tomorrow. There is a Q&A, so please do pop any questions into the Q&A. We'll pick these up either throughout or if not at the end. Jason's going to be chatting for about 45 minutes and then we'll get to any questions that pop up. Yeah, over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Lee. I'm the Collaboration and Information Management Lead here at Chorus. We're a Microsoft partner in the UK with advanced specializations in information protection and governance, among some other things. So today we're looking at some common data protection challenges. And when we say data protection challenges, we're focusing on the technical challenges. So you're going to understand the governance requirements, the regulatory frameworks that apply to your organization. And we're interested in what that looks like in terms of technical challenges and solutions. We're focusing on unstructured data. So that's files, it's emails, and we're looking primarily about how you govern and protect those files within Microsoft 365. So there's a sort of starting assumption that your emails are in Exchange Online and your files are in OneDrive for Business or SharePoint Online, or you're at least on a journey towards that point. So many of these tools do have some capabilities that extend beyond Microsoft 365, but they're really aimed at organizations who are invested in that 365 ecosystem. So we'll look at what you get in terms of solutions with various different Microsoft 365 license levels. We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. We'll be keeping this very high level. So although we love to get down in the technical weeds, there's a lot to cover today. We're focusing on the breadth rather than the depth. So it is going to be quite a high level overview of each of these areas. So the platforms that we're drawing these solutions from, there's two of them. There's Microsoft Purview and there's Microsoft Priva. So Purview gives us a whole range of data risk compliance solutions. It's probably 90% of the solutions we're going to talk about today are coming from Purview. With Purview, you get the basic capabilities with Microsoft 365 E3 licenses or with Business Premium. And you get some advanced capabilities with E5, and we'll cover those differences in much more detail as we go. So Priva, on the other hand, is far more specialized around privacy management. So there's two specific areas. One is about managing privacy risks, and one is about processing subject rights requests, subject access requests, SARs or DSARs, lots of names. And Priva is available in add-on subscriptions for Microsoft 365 users. So we've come up with a way of visualizing these challenges and their solutions on a page. We'll just talk you through that. So we've got, first of all, an inner ring here. Excuse my drawing. Basically shows us the common data protection challenges. The next ring out shows us the solutions that are available to you if you're using E3 or Business Premium licenses. The next ring out again shows the solutions that you get at your E5 license level. And then finally, over here and over here, we've got the add-on solutions. So don't worry about if you can't see all of the detail here. We'll cover all of the component parts and we'll give you a link to a PDF version of this infographic at the end. The diagram is inevitably a simplification. So in reality, there's far more crossover between all of these solutions than we can hope to represent in a diagram like this. But it will hopefully give you an idea of starting points when you're looking to solve some specific challenges. Okay, so we boiled that down into these broad 8 areas that are basically going to take us around that radial diagram, and we'll work through these in turn. So our first challenge, this is all about classifying and protecting information based on its sensitivity. So you might be looking to implement data classification. So if you're working towards ISO 27001, for example, that will be one of your requirements. You might also be looking to encrypt and protect your most sensitive information. So we group these two together because the solution is the same, which is to create and deploy sensitivity labels. And sensitivity labels are part of Microsoft Purview information protection. If you've been around this for a while, it was previously MIP, Microsoft Information Protection. Before that, it was Azure Information Protection. So if we briefly cover the technology, the idea is that we create sensitivity labels, and we use those labels to reflect broad levels of sensitivity. So things like general, internal only, confidential. So ideally, these sensitivity levels are going to align to a well-defined information classification policy that sets out handling instructions for those different sensitivities and so on. But obviously, we're not all starting from the same place on that. We apply these sensitivity labels to files and emails, and we can do that manually, we can do it automatically, and the labels can do various things. They can apply headers and footers. They can apply watermarks in Office documents if you want to sort of watermark confidential draft across your work. And they can apply some protections, so you can encrypt and restrict access using these labels, and once encrypted, you can apply rights management. This is really useful when you want to apply protection that travels with an email or a file. So for example, if you set up a label called confidential HR only, you set it up to use encryption, you apply rights management permissions so that only members of the HR team can view that email or file. It doesn't matter then if that labeled email or file is saved, downloaded, renamed, copied, uploaded to Google Drive, wherever it goes, that encryption, that protection travels with it. And anytime you try and open it and view the content, you're going to be prompted to prove your identity. If you're not a member of the HR team, you're not going to be able to view it. So it's really a sort of great additional layer of protection for your most sensitive content. So at the E3 or Business Premium license level, you get the full functionality of the labels. So the labels can do everything. They can do the content marking, they can do the encryption and the rights management. You use policies to push these labels out to relevant users. And you're basically labeling files and emails manually at this license level. So this is within your Office apps as you save a file, within Adobe Acrobat, within Outlook as you save an email. You'll be prompted to apply a label when you save a file, when you send an email, and that content is then protected. At the E5 license level, you get automatic labeling. And there's broadly 2 ways to do this. You can use some pattern-based approaches. So the technical term is sensitive information types, really useful for predictable sensitive information formats. So things like credit card numbers, national insurance numbers, passport numbers. You can also use machine learning based approaches. So the technical term here is trainable classifiers. And this is where you train an algorithm to recognize particular types of sensitive content, maybe it's things like invoices that follow a less predictable format. So you've got those 2 approaches to lean on. At this license level, you can also set default labels on SharePoint document libraries, and you can integrate on-premises repositories as well. So that's file shares, some versions of SharePoint Server on-premises, You can deploy an on-premises file scanner and start scanning and labeling those files automatically as well.
Oh, Jason, we've just had someone ask if you could enable participant navigation just to review initial slides if they were a little bit late, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure. Let me see if I can do that.
I also have another question that might be relevant to answer now, but we can save some for the end. But someone's come through with what's the best way to come up with your sensitivity labels?
Let's tackle that one at the end because it's
Okay, perfect.
probably quite a long answer. So remind me at the end for that one.
Okay.
Okay, so manual labeling at E3, automatic labeling at E5. I think what we'd say based on our experience is manual labeling is a good place to start. If you just start applying these labels automatically, your users are never going to build an awareness of your classification policy. They're never going to get that understanding of what labels are in use and what labels they should be applying in each scenario. So we do recommend starting with manual labeling, building up that familiarity before you look at automatic labeling. I think I saw a question come in on automatic labeling. We won't get too far into the details with this. Basically, you've got the two approaches we mentioned for looking for sensitive information. So that's pattern-based approaches, machine learning-based approaches. That can then run client-side or server-side. So client-side is as you're typing an email, as you're working in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, saving files, it can recommend a label based on the two approaches we talked about, or it can apply a label automatically. So the recommended labeling can be super useful if you're popping up a policy tip in Outlook saying, hey, it looks like your email contains sensitive information. We recommend you apply the confidential finance label. That's useful. It's nudging users in the right direction while promoting awareness of data protection and your policies. Server-side labeling, this is about labeling at scale. So this will trawl SharePoint Online, trawl OneDrive for business accounts. It can label up to 25,000 items per day. And this is basically working through all your unlabeled content because you're going to be starting from somewhere with this stuff. You're going to have probably huge amounts of content that's sat there unlabeled, and the server-side approach can start working through that content and applying labels automatically. Okay, so the next area is all about managing sensitive data risks. So the focus here is really on how you stop users from sharing sensitive information inappropriately. So that's usually sharing sensitive information with external people, so people outside of your organization. You could use the same technologies to manage or prevent inappropriate sharing within an organization as well. So the primary tool here is DLP, data loss prevention. There are also more specialized capabilities in PREVA with privacy risk management, and we'll take a look at both of those. So DLP is all about creating policies that detect when sensitive information is being shared with the wrong people. At a high level, there's three elements to that. So first of all, you're going to identify the scope. And Purview DLP, you can cover content within Microsoft 365. You can cover teams. You can cover devices with Endpoint DLP. You can cover third-party cloud apps, or some of them at least, through Defender for Cloud Apps. On-premises repositories, so those file shares, legacy SharePoint server versions, Power BI workspaces. So it's a fairly broad set of content to cover there. Once you've targeted your policy, you set up rules for detecting sensitive content. So pattern matching and machine learning are basically the same underlying elements that we talked about for information protection. So it's the same building blocks that we use for automatic labeling. we can use to trigger DLP policies as well. So pattern matching approaches with sensitive information types. So Microsoft give us about 300 built-in sensitive information types to cover all the common predictable patterns, national ID numbers, social security numbers, for pretty much every developed economy in the world. You can also define your own. So if you've got I don't know, project numbers or employee ID numbers that follow a particular format, you can set up your own pattern matching sensitive information types to do that. Machine learning, trainable classifiers, that's the same idea. We're training algorithms to recognize sensitive content based on what it's seen before. There are a couple of other approaches as well. So document fingerprinting, that's looking at sensitive information that follows a similar format. So for example, if all your new product ideas are submitted in a specific word template, there's going to be a broadly similar flow to all of them. And these algorithms can recognize that. And finally, you've got exact data match, which is about looking for sensitive data that crops up in your sensitive information databases. So if you're managing databases, you know those databases contain sensitive information. You can have DLP look for information from those databases showing up in unstructured data in files and emails and triggering policies based on that. Finally, when you've got a match, so we've defined our scope, we've set up some logic to detect sensitive content. When we do detect sensitive content, we're going to want to apply some actions. So we can do everything from audit only to sending an alert to administrators, to showing the user a policy tip to say, hey, it looks like you're sending something sensitive here. Are you sure that's what you want to do? Right up to blocking it altogether. So you've got a broad range of capabilities there. Breather Privacy Risk Management is really a more focused version of that. So it's about looking at potential privacy issues in 3 ways. So data overexposure, data transfer, and aged personal data. So data overexposure, this is about looking for personal data that's shared in a few ways. It could be anonymous links. It could be links that grant access to everyone in the company, or it could be that content sat in a SharePoint or OneDrive with guest users in there as well. So those are 3 decent indicators that you've got overexposed sensitive data. Data transfer policies are about looking for how that data is shared, so very similar to DLP, just in a slightly more structured way. And data minimization, that aged personal data, that's about looking for data that's sensitive, that's been untouched for some time. So it might be 30 days, it might be a year or 2, but it's about flagging when sensitive data is potentially becoming dormant, becoming forgotten, and could be cleaned up. The real benefits of privacy risk management are it gives you basically a really nice flow for processing these alerts. It gives you a triage process where you have what's like a backlog of potential alerts that it's flagged. Your compliance team can then work through those alerts, and they've got a range of sort of predefined responses. They can notify users, they can apply labels to protect the content, they can make it private, or they can delete the content. So the off-the-shelf policies are a pretty good place to start with privacy risk management, but you can really customize this as far as you could possibly want to. Lisa, did I see a question come in on
on the chat?
exact data match?
How does the system see what's in the database? Are you specifically referring to Access databases or SQL in Azure or other?
Could be any database format. Basically, it works. You take a hash of the database, so you're effectively encrypting the database. You're giving it following a schema. and your policy, your DLP policy is then basically looking for matches for that hash. So it doesn't really matter what the database format is. I believe off the top of my head, you might have to export it into CSV format before you hash it. We can look into the details of that. But yeah, it's database format agnostic, and it's just looking for instances of that specific sensitive data that matches your hash data showing up in files and emails. Hopefully that answers that one. If not, do feel free to follow up. So in terms of licensing, the E3 or business premium level basically gives you the core DLP solution. And this limits your scopes to SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Exchange Online. It's worth saying with that, though, SharePoint is increasingly used as a back-end solution for pretty much every other Microsoft 365 service that depends on file storage. So if you're, for example, setting up a Viva Engage community, that's going to be backed onto a SharePoint site. If you're using Microsoft Teams, you're storing files in it, that's backed onto a SharePoint site. So covering SharePoint Online with a DLP policy actually covers a pretty broad range of file content that you're storing in Microsoft 365. In terms of the detection capabilities at the E3 or BP level, you're looking at pattern matching. So you're looking at using those built-in or custom sensitive information types. At the E5 level, you get a more advanced DLP solution. So this basically unlocks the additional scopes. It unlocks Teams, Power BI, on-premises repositories, cloud apps through Defender for Cloud Apps, and managed devices as well. It also gives you the smarter detection capabilities. So it unlocks trainable classifiers, document fingerprinting, and EDM.
I've got one other question just come in Q&A. Do Microsoft have any plans to integrate Copilot with Microsoft Purview?
Yes, it is fully integrated already. When we come on to sort of communication compliance policies, that kind of thing, you can scope in Copilot prompts as part of that. The sort of route to Copilot optimization that Microsoft recommend in terms of getting ready for Copilot is all about leveraging these technologies. It's all about leveraging lifecycle management, leveraging protection, because Copilot will respect the rights management permissions that you've defined in your labels. DLP policies can lock down files to prevent them being extracted by Copilot. There's a sort of whole range of integrations there. That's probably a topic for another webinar on another day. But yes, it's Microsoft are very compliance focused with Copilot, and Purview has a fairly major role to play in that. Okay, final one on licensing in this area. Privacy risk management is an add-on, so it doesn't matter what license level you're using, you can purchase it on a per user per month basis. And the key benefits there is really the predefined policies and that structured review process. It's basically giving you some ready to go building blocks rather than making you do everything yourself. Okay, so another common challenge is understanding what sensitive information you're storing, basically finding out where you're keeping your sensitive data. So this is probably one of the sort of most reported data risks that organizations identify, this so-called dark data. You're not quite sure what you're storing, so you don't know whether it's sensitive or not. It is particularly challenging with things like file shares. We do have more options once you get your data into Microsoft 365. So for data at rest, so data you're storing, You've got a few options in Purview. We've got Content Explorer, Content Search, e-discovery, and for sensitive data in transit, you've got DLP that we've covered already. So we'll have a quick look at the new technologies there. Content Explorer, first of all, this is a really good way of getting a breakdown, a drilling down into where the sensitive data is right across your tenancy. So you've got a couple of ways of drilling into this, well, more than a couple actually. So if you've rolled out sensitivity labels, you can drill down by label. So pick a label and you start exploring, okay, let's have a look at SharePoint. Let's see which specific sites have files labeled confidential in, or whatever it might be. Similar for retention labels, which we'll cover shortly. And these classifiers that we mentioned earlier, sensitive information types and trainable classifiers, you can also use those to drill down into content as well. So the screenshots on the right, we're using a finance trainable classifier, which is a built-in classifier provided by Microsoft. So they've sort of ready trained it on a whole bunch of financial content. It's there, it's ready to use. We can drill down into that and say, okay, for this finance classifier, where's our matching content? In this case, you can see we drill down into SharePoint. We can see which specific sites have content that's matching this classifier. So in this case, we've got a finance site, we've got an account site, personnel and business development. So not too many concerns there. Finance is top of the list. So you can hopefully see how that can be useful. Content search is a little bit more focused. So this is about locating a specific content. So again, you're searching right across everything. You're searching your mailboxes, your OneDrive for Business, SharePoint online sites, including every app that backs onto SharePoint. And you can search for content in a whole different variety of ways. So you can search based on keywords. You can look for specific words or phrases. You can refine based on properties of files or emails. You can filter based on authors, last modified, recipients. You've got a whole range of ways of drilling down into content. So it's useful when you want to, if you find all references to a particular subject right across your tenancy. Finally, you've got e-discovery. So this is about locating really very specific information. So it's aimed at investigations, might be internal investigations, might be legal issues, could also be data subject requests, so SARS, DSARS, so whatever you call them. And the high level process, you start by creating a case, you run searches to look across all of your repositories to find what you're looking for. You can apply holds if you need to. So if you need to preserve content to make sure that it's not deleted or modified while your investigation is going on, you can do that. And finally, you can export the results if you need to at the end. So in terms of what you get at each license level, at E3 or Business Premium, so you'll notice a theme with Purview. Basically, what you get at E3 and what you get at a Business Premium is the same. At this level, you can use Content Explorer, you can use Content Search, and you get a basic version of e-discovery. At the E5 level, you get a more sophisticated version of e-discovery. So you get more advanced ways of refining your searches, really. So when you've searched across everything in your tenancy, you've pulled back a vast amount of content, you've got some very clever capabilities within eDiscovery Premium to refine that, to reduce duplication, to apply redaction, to send notices to people whose content you're putting on hold, all of those kind of capabilities. E5 also gives you the ability to find sensitive content on managed devices, so stored locally on managed Windows or Mac OS devices, and also locate sensitive content on on-prem repositories. So your managed, your SharePoint server, legacy deployments, your file shares, You've got capabilities for finding sensitive content in those locations as well. Okay. So the next challenge is detecting risky behavior, so managing internal data risks. And that's typically things like inadvertent data leaks, possibly intentional data theft as well. And the solution here is insider risk management. So insider risk management is it's a platform that draws on a whole bunch of different Microsoft security compliance tools. And the idea is that everything comes together to give you something really powerful. So it's built around signals, and the technical term for these is policy indicators. And these policy indicators can include a whole range of things. It can be things like someone deleting a bunch of files on SharePoint. It could be someone copying files to a portable drive. It could be someone swiping an access card to get into a server room. It's one of those things that the more mature you are in terms of your adoption of Microsoft security and compliance, the more you're going to get out of this. So if you've onboarded end user devices for compliance, you're going to be able to collect indicators for things like copying files to USBs or moving files to network shares. If you've deployed Defender for Endpoint, you're going to get indicators for things like installing malicious software. If you're using Defender for Cloud apps, you're going to be able to collect indicators for third-party cloud apps, Box.com, Dropbox, signals from those platforms as well. There's also a whole range of connectors you can leverage to pull in data from line of business apps. So it could be physical access management, get indicators from people using a swipe card. It could be the HR connector to sort of manage hiring events, people submitting their notice on an HR system. And insider risk management is all about correlating these signals. So any one of these signals in isolation is probably meaningless, but when a whole bunch of them happen together, you've got a much better indication that there might be a problem. So classic example is someone hands in a notice at the same time as they're downloading a whole bunch of files from SharePoint. So that's a potential indicator of data theft. Insider risk management gives you fairly robust case management functionality. So basically you're collecting all these alerts when these signals have correlated. It's allowing you to work through those alerts, choose an appropriate response. It really gives you that sort of end-to-end way of managing your backlog, responding, escalating if you need to, integrating with event management and so on. This is one of those capabilities that's E5 only. So there's no insider risk management functionality at E3 or Business Premium. It is available through add-ons if you're on enterprise licensing. So I believe the E5 compliance and E5 insider risk management add-ons both include insider risk management. Okay, the next challenge is governing access to SharePoint sites, Microsoft Teams, any other group-based collaboration spaces in Microsoft 365. I think a lot of organizations probably struggle with this. There's usually two extreme approaches. One is to sort of manage risk by locking absolutely everything down, which obviously hampers productivity, it hampers external collaboration. The other extreme is to take a sort of site by site or team by team approach and try and micromanage everything very centrally, which is very unwieldy, very labor intensive. Sensitivity labels can give us a happy medium here. So as well as setting up sensitivity labels to classify files and emails, you can use them to label, classify and protect sites and teams as well. And the idea here is your content owners, as they're creating a site or a team, they choose a label, they choose the classification, your policy does the rest. So when you apply a label to a SharePoint site or a team, you can have that label do various things. You can have it manage privacy options, so control whether anything based on a group is public or private. You can control external sharing options. So you can have it, for example, so if I create a team and label it general, great, I can add external users to that team. If I label it as highly confidential, then we might lock it down so it's internal users only. You can also apply conditional access policies through a technology called authentication contexts, and that basically opens up a whole range of possibilities. So any controls that you want to put in place when people manage a general site or a confidential site or a highly sensitive site, you can tie that to conditional access and have it manage access for you. So it's a really powerful but also a low maintenance way of applying some governance over SharePoint sites and teams without micromanagement or a one-size-fits-all approach. All of those capabilities are available at the E3 and Business Premium license level. If you want to leverage conditional access policies, that also requires Entra P1 Premium licenses, which you might get through various other license subscriptions. So, for example, if you're on the Microsoft Business Premium, you'll get Entra P1 Premium as part of that. But yeah, if you do want to leverage conditional access policies, you'll need to make sure that's included in your Entra licensing as well. Okay, so next broad area is data investigations. So two main types of data investigation that you're likely to come across. One would be responding to subject access requests, possibly freedom of information requests as well. The other type of investigation is usually legal investigations, internal investigations, so retrieving information to support a specific investigation. So the solutions here, e-discovery, 2 versions, which we've covered already, and also Priva subject rights requests. So Priva subject rights request basically gives you a really structured process for processing your subject access requests. So it guides you through a workflow. Every time you get one of these in, you start by sort of estimating the amount of volume, you retrieve your data, you work through a review process, you get approval if necessary, particularly if you're deleting content in response to a request, generate a report and close the request. So it's a guided end-to-end process. It gives you some really sophisticated capabilities for doing that. So you've got some very clever filtering. You've got the ability to redact content. So if you are providing information in response to a request, you've got the ability to redact information that you don't want shared. You've got capabilities in there for managing retention conflicts as well. This is if you've got a request requiring you to delete content, you've also got a retention policy requiring that that content is retained. You've got processes and tools to help you manage that, and you've got deduplication as well. So in terms of functionality and licensing, E3 Business Premium gives you that basic e-discovery. E5 gives you the advanced e-discovery, and Priva subject rights requests is an add-on. So you buy these on a pay-as-you-go basis if you want the Priva subject rights requests. I believe you can purchase them in packs of 1, 10 or 100, and basically you're paying for however many you need. It's probably worth saying that the big advantage of Preverb subject rights requests is that managed workflow. So in terms of the capabilities for finding information, you've got all that within eDiscovery already. This is about making it easier, making it less onerous, giving you that that guided process on top. Okay, I'm going to cover this one fairly briefly. Managing communications. So two sides to this. One is detecting problematic behavior within internal communications. It could be things like bullying or harassment. Could also be specific regulatory things inside of trading. You may also have requirements, specific requirements to stop any information sharing between specific areas of your business as well. So for the inappropriate communications, we've got communications compliance. So we can detect inappropriate communications in various ways. You'll remember trainable classifiers from earlier. So Microsoft give us around 100 trainable classifiers. They include things like profanity, threats, targeted harassment. So they're ready to go, AI trained ways of detecting these kind of problems. In terms of the channels that you cover, we can cover email, we can cover Teams chats, we can cover chats or posts in Viva Engage or Yammer as it was, and you can cover interactions with Copilot from Microsoft 365 as well. So if you're concerned about what kind of information people are using in their Copilot prompts, that is now covered as well. And communications compliance, it's a sophisticated tool. It gives you a nicely structured process for managing these things. So you get a triage process where you can respond, you can escalate if you need to, you can send predefined notices to tell people to behave themselves, I guess, and you can trigger flows if you want to as well. So if you've got custom processes that you need to follow, you can integrate those and trigger those from communications compliance. Information barriers, this is far more of a blunt tool. So this is a simple block on communication between areas of an organization. So you start by dividing your workforce up into segments, and you can divide people up using a fairly broad range of exchange attributes. There's almost always going to be a way of dividing people the way you want. You're then basically creating policies that either allow or block communication between any two of those segments. And you probably see from the screenshots, it's a one-way thing. So each policy is one way. So if we want to block communication in both directions, we set up two policies. It's primarily aimed at Teams chats. You can opt in SharePoint and OneDrive as well. So in this example, if you've got a SharePoint site owned by the red team, you can stop them inviting members of the blue team to join that site. It's worth clarifying though, this particular capability doesn't apply to email. If you did want to block emails between two areas of your business, you do that with mail flow rules. So it's not like there aren't solutions, but it's not something that information barriers does. Now, both of these capabilities are E5 licensing level only. They're both also available through those two add-ons that we mentioned earlier, which is the E5 compliance add-on and the E5 insider risk management. So if you're on enterprise licensing and you don't want to shell out for the full E5, there are some options there. Okay, our very last area for today is lifecycle management. This is a fairly big one, so it covers quite a few scenarios. It could be how do you protect information from deletion while you're obliged to keep it? How do you preserve information that you need for record keeping requirements? How do you ensure that information is deleted when you're obliged to delete it? And possibly how do you prove that information's been deleted as well? In some industries, you are required to provide proof of deletion. And there are two solutions within Purview for doing this: data lifecycle management and records management. They do overlap substantially. So if we take a quick look at each of those in turn. So data lifecycle management, first of all, the idea here is that you create retention labels, and you create these labels to reflect usually business content types. So they might be things like invoices, complaints, management accounts, CVs or resumes. And for each of those labels, those categories that you define, you're going to associate a control with that label. And the control might be to retain it for a specific length of time. It might be to delete it after a specific length of time, or it might be a combination of the two. It might be keep it and then delete it at the end of that retention period. You can apply these labels manually. So in SharePoint document libraries, users can apply these labels as they'd apply any other metadata. You can also apply these labels automatically using those same approaches and algorithms that we mentioned earlier. So sensitive information types for nice predictable patterns, and trainable classifiers for less predictable formats. I think I just saw a question come in on when that retention period starts. At the basic level, you've got three choices. It can be when the file was created, when the file was last modified, or when the label was applied. There are a couple of more advanced choices there which come up under records management. So records management, it uses the same building blocks. So it's built on retention labels, just like data lifecycle management, and you can use the two solutions interchangeably. So if you create a label in records management, it's going to show up in data lifecycle management as well. Records management does give you some more robust capabilities. So it introduces things like disposition reviews. So this means that when you've got a retention period, when you reach the end of that retention period, rather than either deleting the file or leaving it alone, you can start a review process. So you trigger a review process, the reviewer can triage it, have a look at it, they can then permanently delete it, change the label, extend the retention period, or run a custom process if you want to. Event-driven retention, it's like a kind of time bombing idea. So you trigger a retention period in response to an event. So let's say you're labeling HR records. While an employee is with your organization, you're going to want to keep those records indefinitely. When that employee leaves, the clock starts ticking and you'll be obliged to delete that information after a specific length of time. So event-driven retention, you can trigger a retention event when something happens, like a resignation event, and that will effectively start the clock ticking on these labels, so that 3 years later, 1 year later, 6 months later, whatever you define, that content is then deleted or that review is triggered. You can also create file plans, which are basically a more robust way of managing labels and classifications. It basically allows you to define all your retention policies on paper in a spreadsheet, import them into Microsoft 365 and have them take action from there. So at the E3 or BP level, you get the data lifecycle management solution, and you're basically looking at manual labeling. You can also set default retention labels on SharePoint libraries or on folders. You can also apply default retention labels on mailbox folders as well. So if you're on an HR team and you have a folder called CVs, you could set a label on that folder. Everything you drag in there, that retention label will be automatically applied. It's actually not a bad place to start. It kind of emphasizes the importance of taking lifecycle requirements into account when you're designing your SharePoint information architecture. So if you've got a well-defined architecture and you've defined your sites based on ownership, you've defined your libraries based on lifecycle management requirements, then being able to set default retention labels on libraries is super useful and will take you a long way. The E5 level unlocks records management. So that gives you those additional capabilities. It gives you the automatic labeling, the disposition reviews, the event-driven retention, and the file plans. So there you have it. That's a very high-level view of what you can leverage within Purview and Priva to solve some of those common problems. So as we said before, this is inevitably somewhat of a simplification. There's lots of crossover and interaction between these solutions. You probably got a feel for that when you saw things like trainable classifiers and sensitive information types come up in multiple places. But this does hopefully give you an idea of where to start with some of these data protection and governance challenges. Okay. In terms of next steps, we've summarized sort of a few resources here to give you some further information. The first link there is the link to the infographic we mentioned, and we're obviously very happy to talk to you if you need any help implementing any of this stuff. So we've now got a few minutes left for questions. If we just circle back, I know so there was a question at the start on, was it how you go about choosing what sensitivity labels you want to define?
What is the best way to come up with your sensitivity labels?
Okay, so ideally policy leads technology. So ideally we're going to define the policy first. We're going to define what our labels should be, and we'll implement the technology in response to that. So when you're choosing what your labels should be, there's probably a few sort of common ones to start with. So public, general, confidential, highly confidential. You'll find loads of information, loads of examples on the internet of common classification schemes. If you're working in sectors like government, it'll be defined for you. They've got things like official and official sensitive predefined. Really what you're trying to do is define buckets into which all your content sits. So the way I'd approach it, if I was doing this from scratch, you'd engage with each area of your business in turn, each area of your organization, and talk about the kind of sensitive content, the kind of content that they're working with, and what kind of requirements they have around sensitivity. If they own the content, they're going to understand that best. And you'll go team by team, you'll engage with all these business users, these content owners, and try and build up an understanding of what kind of content they're working with. You're then going to try and define a set of buckets, ideally 3 to 4. So Microsoft recommends no more than what they call 5 by 5, which is basically 5 top level labels and then 5 variations on each label. We can't really get into sub-labels today, but it gives you an idea. Usually a classification scheme will have 3 or 4 top level labels. You can then test it, and you test it on paper or as a whiteboard exercise. You've got your starter set of labels, might be general, public, confidential, highly confidential. Test it. Take a piece of sensitive content, invoices, statements of work, see which bucket, which label it falls into, and you'll soon find whether you've got any gaps in your policy. So we quickly found when we were rolling this out a few years ago, we found a sort of clear gap, and we sort of adjusted our labels, added a limited label to account for that. And it's you can only really get the classification scheme right by testing it against some real content as a paper exercise, just to say, okay, these are all the types of content I'm dealing with. Do they fit neatly into these buckets that we've defined? Hopefully that gives you some ideas for that one.
Perfect. We'll probably be wrapping up shortly, so do pop any questions in either the chat or Q&A. They both come through. One that came up earlier, but I wanted to say at the end, was more general, which is where would you recommend starting?
In terms of rolling out these technologies, usually, I think that the three to start with would be sensitivity classification, lifecycle management, and DLP. So they're kind of the foundational three technologies. So classification gets you off to a good start. So once you start labeling and classifying things, you're immediately building more insight into how you're working and where you're storing sensitive data. Lifecycle management, super important. If you do start looking at things like Copilot for Microsoft 365, becomes even more important because you don't want Copilot giving you answers based on ancient and redundant information. Lifecycle management, especially people are increasingly aware that you can't keep everything forever. Every piece of information should have an owner and it should have a shelf life. And then DLP is giving you a safety net. It's basically saying, okay, we've got classification going on. We're hopefully managing access. We're governing our SharePoint sites and teams properly. But if something does slip through the net, if users do make mistakes, we can step in there and gently suggest that they might be doing the wrong thing. So yeah, those three.
Amazing. I'm conscious people might need to drop off soon, so just to confirm that the recording and the slide deck will be sent to everyone, so you will get a copy of that. I have got another question come in. Can third-party organisations such as solicitors be granted direct access to e-discovery cases, or would it need to be exported and transferred another way?
It would need to be exported. I mean, you could license the user from your legal counsel and give them access that way, but it's access to the e-discovery platform is designed to be sort of internal licensed users. You can export it in sort of an industry standard format, which I believe is the EDRM format, that should hopefully make it easier for those solicitors to work with your exported content.
Amazing. I think that's it for questions. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. You will be sent all the resources. If you didn't get a chance to ask Jason any questions, just reply to the email when it gets sent out, and we can happily answer them. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everyone.